Hi everyone, we're about to start. Can everyone make your way to the stairs, please? Grab a drink. Grab a drink and then head to the stairs. Shall I turn that one off?
Yeah, I just put it to mute. So are you... And then green is...
Testing.
So we did probably one or two of them. And then we have Architecture Week, which is usually in September, which is where we do, we have quite a few events in the span of a week. So, yeah, we're just trying to do events if we can. So, something we're trying to get into.
Jenny? Tell her just to keep us a heads up before she stops. Yeah. Bro.
Kia ora, everyone. Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Jenny Chen, an architect at Mahoney, and here tonight representing the New Zealand Institute of Architects, Auckland and Northland branch. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to our event, AI and the Future of the Architectural Profession. I'm not going to take much of your time, and in a moment, I'll invite our speaker, Neil Leach. I would like to thank the Institute and Warramane for our venue, and some housekeeping. In the unlikely event of an emergency, please exit down the stairs, out the doors, and towards Daldy Street. If you need to use the restrooms, these are down the laneway and to the left. A reminder that tonight's event is also being live streamed and recorded. So a warm welcome to everyone who has joined online. Tonight's speaker, Neil Leach, is an architect, author, professor, and former researcher for NASA. He currently directs at Florida's International University's doctorate program and has also taught at AA, Harvard, and more. He's also published the first book on AI and architecture, so we're in for a real treat tonight to be able to listen to his insights on AI. For the first part, Neil will present, and then we'll take questions, so please save your questions for then. For those online, please drop your questions into the YouTube chat. Everyone, let's join me in warmly welcoming Neil Leach. Thank you, Neil.
Do you need this? No, I got the speaker, right? I don't think I need this. Okay. I do. Okay. Great to be here. I actually have my mother's family came across to New Zealand, and I had some distant relatives around, mainly in Wellington. And one year I came here to visit them for New Year, and then flew on the 1st of January to Hawaii, and we crossed the date line. We went back 1 year in time, and I had 2 New Years in Hawaii. So New Zealand plays a big role in my background. I used to be a runner, and I ran against John Walker a few times. I mean, he was not at his best by then, but he still thrashed me. And Mark Burry is a good friend of mine. Mark, you probably know of Sagrada Familia fame, is the son of Hugh Burry, who was an All Black. And of course, all architects like all the All Blacks because they wear black. Anyway, so thank you for inviting me. I just mentioned that here that I've a couple of pointers. The Digital Futures International. Okay, I see. Okay, Digital Futures. It's not on that one. Okay, we're going to go back. Yeah, if you're interested in the technical side of how you do this, we've got a lot of we have a lot of sessions on Digital Futures, which is a platform I set up. They're all free. If you just go to that site, and you'll find our YouTube connection, and there are a lot of things there. They're all out of date now, of course. These things change every few months, but we try to keep up. And there are also some very interesting tutorial lectures about AI, neuroscience, and architecture, and God knows what else. And my Instagram's there in case you're interested in seeing what I've been experimenting with. And thank you, Warren and Mahoney. Are you called that, or are you called Wham? I wasn't quite sure, but it's great to be here in your amazing offices and an incredible city. I was walking here past all these yachts, and amazing. So I'm going to just just briefly mention that this has got longer by 3 today. I keep getting invited to more, but I'm going around the world, which is an efficient way of doing it. And if you go westward, you don't get jet lag. Jules Verne went eastward, and he gained a day. I lost a day. I lost the 24th of April somewhere on the way. But anyway, I'm just going to. These should flick round, and I'll just use them as a background. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have been using Midjourney, DALL-E, LookX, and so on, and exploring these things. And I have, just to kind of keep up to date on what's happening. Frankly, these are completely artificial, superficial. They're just kind of sketches, and I think this is the future of AI is not going to be these. It's going to be something completely different. Nonetheless, there's something I think very fascinating about what they can do, and frankly, quite terrifying. I'm going to terrify you today, slightly. You guys terrify everyone else with your haka at the beginning of a rugby game, and I think I should get my own back for once. So perhaps just to say something about what my view about AI, and I've been working on 2017, 2000, yeah. I'm absolutely amazed, totally amazed by what AI can do and what it's going to do, but also completely terrified, absolutely terrified. And it didn't take me long to realize that and I had a contract first with RIBA, and I switched to Bloomsbury, the publishers of Harry Potter, I'd been working it for one summer, and I felt very compromised because I felt like Elon Musk. Basically, I could see the potential of AI, but Elon Musk reckons it could be the end of civilization. So I could see the dark side as well. So I persuaded my publishers to produce two books. The first book being a white cover, like the angel, the good side, the nice side of AI, and there's also going to be one with the black cover, the dark side, the Black Mirror episode, as it were, of AI. And I had been planning to put that off for longer until I'd written some more books about about the positive side of AI. But somehow history is upon us quicker than we thought, and maybe I should be starting the one with the black cover soon. Just to be clear, I think that there's nothing about AI that is there's nothing negative about, nothing evil about AI. It's just a tool. But like any tool, it depends on who uses it and for what. I can take a kitchen knife and I can cut up my vegetables, or I can murder you with my kitchen knife. But so far, no kitchen knife has been convicted of a murder. I was in Fiji before this, and I asked everyone whether they played rugby, and they said yes. And eventually someone said, everyone plays rugby here. So that was a Mercedes-Benz that was done to sponsor the Fijian rugby team, and this was something to do with the Maori patterns and something. These things take 3 seconds. That's the astonishing thing about them. Anyway, there's nothing evil about AI, but I think about them a bit like the yin-yang sign, where in this Korean flag, where the white section's got a black circle in it and the black section's got a white circle in it. There is something about AI that is so incredibly powerful that makes it also terrifying. So I think the white already has the seed of the other side. So today, I've divided this into 5 sections. What is AI? A brief history of AI. I bought my house from Stephen Hawking, who wrote A Brief History of Time, so I like that term. How can AI be used in design? Then the main thing is 10 predictions about the future of AI. Practices like bullet points, and there are 10 bullet points. And then just to terrify at the end, why we should not underestimate AI. So what is AI? I mean, briefly, the shortest definition, or the most useful definition, is that it's like a digital brain. It's not the same as a brain, but it's kind of like a digital brain. But this definition from Margaret Bowden, I think, is quite useful. Research in AI seeks to make computers do the sorts of things that minds can do. The point about the brain is that now we're using neural networks. Now, there are 2 points about this is quite a good definition, but in a way it's outdated, because there are already certain things that AI can do that the mind can't do. There's no point taking on AI at chess or Go anymore. It'll thrash us. And secondly, we've got to ask the question whether AI needs to do all the things that the mind can do. Does it need to be conscious? I personally don't think so. This is another question, I won't go into it, but as long as my toaster can make good toast, I don't care if it's conscious enough. As long as my Midjourney, whatever, can generate good designs, I don't care if it's conscious. But anyway, so just to kind of follow up from that, I mean, ChatGPT already knows 10,000 times more than any one person. So again, I think AI can do a lot more than we can already. So this gives you a sense of, I don't know if this is the neural network of the brain itself. On the right-hand side, the neural network, the artificial neural network, which is loosely modeled on the brain. Only loosely modeled, kind of inspired by the brain. But the circles are called neurons. And then you can see the arrows and the lines joining them. They're called synapses. And of course, borrowing the name from the brain itself. And the information flows from left to right, and it's governed by the weight and so on and so on. You don't need to know very much, but the point is, it is only loosely modeled on the brain. And there's a danger you can call... When you talk about artificial intelligence, you anthropomorphize it and think about it in terms of human intelligence. I like to use the term alien intelligence because it is so completely different, I think, to human intelligence. When you think about AI, don't think about humanoid robots, no matter what Sophia might tell you. Or Hanson Robotics, who market to Sophia. If you want to think about AI, don't think humanoid robots. I mean, humanoid robots might be controlled by AI, but they're no more AI than a Tesla car is AI. If you want to think about what AI is, think algorithms, think code, think software. AI is essentially software. It's very sophisticated software, but it's software nonetheless. So in the office of the future, or indeed in the office of today in some senses, you're not going to be surrounded by humanoid robots, but you are going to be surrounded by AI. In fact, you already are. AI is what filters out your spam on your email. It's what finishes off your sentence on Gmail. It's what translates on WeChat. It's what recognizes your friends on Facebook. It's what allows you to order an Uber car, and so on and so on and so on. We're everywhere surrounded by AI, but we're not aware of it because it's kind of invisible. And I made this comment in my book, which I'm quite proud of because I used the term alien before anyone else did. It's as though the Earth has been invaded by an invisible, super intelligent alien species, and I'll come back to that later. So the history of AI. I don't want to sound British, but the British have played quite a big role in AI, and Alan Turing was the first person to conceptualize the possibility of connecting computers to intelligence with this article he produced in 1950. Of course, he tragically died in 1954, and he wasn't around for when the term itself was coined, which was in 1955 for an event that was to take place in 56, a workshop that was organized by all the smartest brains young brains in the States at the time at Dartmouth College, where they planned to solve the basic problems of AI within 2 years. That didn't happen. In the middle, on the black and white photograph at the back there, you can see Marvin Minsky. Claude Shannon is on the far right. He's one of the leading figures. And I think just slightly behind him is John McCarthy. I'm not sure if that's him or not. But the slightly portly-looking gentleman second on the left in the bottom photograph is John McCarthy. He was the guy who coined the term artificial intelligence. He was never very happy with the term, but they had to call it something, and so they chose the term artificial intelligence. He'd read it somewhere else, and he could never find out where he'd found it before. Anyway, that's the term. It's not a very good term because it's not artificial, it's synthetic, and as soon as you use the term intelligence, you automatically anthropomorphize it. So anyway, and in the bottom right, the color photograph is when the survivors, as it were, of the original event got back together in 2006 for the 50th reunion. And by 2006, they had to admit they hadn't achieved very much. AI had been a disaster. The primary purpose, well, at least it was funded by the military, and one of the primary purposes was to try and understand what the Soviets were saying. But it was really very bad at translating. It's a famous case of where the expression out of sight, out of mind was translated into Russian and back into English again. It came out as an invisible lunatic. So it was not doing very well. And part of the reason, frankly, was because there have been different camps, different ways of approaching AI. There were 5 of them, basically, but the leading 2 were symbolic AI, which is based on logic, and connectionist AI, which is based on neural networks. Now, neural networks had shown some very early promise under Pitts and McCulloch, but basically, Marvin Minsky and a colleague had written a book saying they're going nowhere, completely trashing them, and they were out of favor. By a strange coincidence, however, this guy, Geoffrey Hinton, stuck with it. Geoffrey Hinton is interesting. He's the great-grandson of George Boole, of Boolean geometry fame. His middle name is Everest, and like his great-great-uncle or something was the guy who surveyed India and called Everest Everest. And he studied architecture for 2 days at the University of Cambridge. When I told this to Marta Sigari at Foster and Partners, he decided to change. She said, he was smart. It took me 5 years to realize I shouldn't be doing architecture. Anyway, he eventually went into kind of neuroscience. He wanted to know how the mind worked. And by a complete coincidence, he happened to be quite good at neural networks, and he went into AI. Another complete coincidence happened around 2006, and that's when they developed, well, around 2000, they developed GPUs, graphic processing units, basically for gaming. But then they discovered that they were really good at making computers much more powerful and much faster. So all of a sudden, these neural networks that were not working started working incredibly well, and that's when what's called the deep learning revolution took off. And the main reason, there's 5 up there, but by far the most important is the invention of GPUs and the improvements in computation that allowed this to happen. So if you look at this diagram here, deep learning, that's what happens. ChatGPT, Midjourney, DALL-E, and so on, it's all deep learning. That is a subset of machine learning, which itself is a subset of the broader term artificial intelligence. So we're using the term artificial intelligence back in 1956, but the difference between what it's now is much greater than you can imagine the first ever car and a Tesla self-driving car. It's much, much more different. It's a huge, huge difference, but now we're in the domain of deep learning. And maybe just to illustrate the difference, what happened between those two worlds, this was 1997, and Ray Kurzweil predicted that by the year 2000, AI would beat the world chess champion. In fact, in 1997, Garry Kasparov took on IBM's Deep Blue, and of course nobody imagined that he would ever lose. One of the greatest chess players of all time was going to lose, and he was suspicious that Deep Blue had been cheating, but eventually conceded that actually it was better than him and made this comment: we just have to understand that everything we know how to do, machines will eventually do better than us. Not everything at the same time, but gradually. And I think that's probably completely correct. Anything you can do, AI can do better. But the real challenge happened in 2016 when AlphaGo, or DeepMind in London, took on Lee Sedol of Korea at Go, who is the kind of Garry Kasparov of the game of Go. And Go, of course, we don't play it in the West very much, but even though it's a kind of straightforward game in some sense, it is infinitely complicated because there are more potential moves in Go than there are atoms in the universe. It is extremely complicated. And even if you hooked up all the computers in the world together, you would not be able to use the system they'd use for the game of chess to play this game. So they had to move from expert systems to learning systems. This is where deep learning came in, and where everybody all of a sudden paid attention to what was going on, at least those people working in the world of AI. This is a comment that was made by Lee Sedol after game 2. Yesterday, after game 1, I was surprised, but today I am speechless. There was clearly something in game 2 that happened that completely threw him. And this was it. I can't point to it, but the black stone with the white circle in it is this is like one move in one game of Go transformed the world of AI. It's move 37 in game 2, and the black stone was being played by AlphaGo, and normally you don't put it on the 5th line so early on away from the side. It's only the 4th or the 3rd line. This move had never been played before, and everybody thought it's a computer glitch, it's a mistake, useless, AI is rubbish, never beat Lee Sedol. Then 100 moves later, the two black stones on the left-hand side that are kind of facing it, they joined together, and all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, but gradually began to realize that this wasn't a glitch, but this was as though AlphaGo was thinking 100 moves ahead, way ahead of what humans could even imagine. This, in fact, so this is the comments of the commentators at the time. They thought it was a mistake.
The Google team was talking about is this kind of evaluation value? Ooh.
That's a very surprising move.
I thought it was a mistake.
I thought it was a mistake. It was no mistake. And this is the comment that Lisa Dahl made. AlphaGo showed us that moves humans may have thought are creative were actually conventional. I think the important thing was really something completely different, and that is to say AI was operating at a level we simply couldn't understand. We could not understand. Those of you who got dogs know that a dog can smell and hear a range of smells and noises that we can't reach. This is what's going to happen with AI. And very soon, they're predicting, there's a guy who talks about this and says that we're soon going to find that AI is going to have a IQ of 1,600, and it's just going to be off the scale. We have got no clue what it is thinking about, inverted commas, and I think that's going to be the case. Anyway, how can we use AI in the world of design? Well, 2012, this actually was Geoffrey Hinton, and this is when people suddenly woke up, in fact, to deep learning, to neural networks. There was a competition that was held in trying to find which system could recognize images. Now we take image recognition for granted. We've all got facial recognition on our cameras now, but 2012, it didn't exist. And so anyway, Geoffrey Hinton and his team went into this thing, and they used this neural network. And this was like an obsolete technology. It was like using a steam train or something, and nobody was joking about it, whatever. And actually, not only did it win, but it trounced the opposition. And Fei Li, and maybe this is an exaggeration here, but in her autobiography, she says it was like someone had just beaten the world speed record by 100 miles an hour, driving a Ford Corsair or something. And I'm not sure that's the case or not, but it certainly shocked people. And all of a sudden, people say, oh, yes, I always thought that deep learning was the way forward. They completely changed. And so we have it down to Geoffrey Hinton. He was the one, basically, who accidentally moved into AI and used GPUs that accidentally happened to be good at making computers faster. So the history of AI is a history of accidents, frankly. Anyway, the real development, the real holy grail for computer science was not to recognize an image, but to generate an image, to synthesize an image. And what they discovered is if you took that process and instead of going from left to right, you went from right to left, you could actually produce an image, a very trippy image. And I won't go into this. There's some theories about how if you hallucinate these images, are very similar to the way that your mind can be controlled by certain substances. But then there is a theory about that. I'm sure in New Zealand it'd be very popular. But what happens is unfortunately, it becomes pose invariant. It loses a sense of where the information about where these things should be has been lost. So you get these dogs and serpents and looks like an oil lamp or something all over the place. But that was the first step forward. In 2015, 16, I think it was, they had the first ever exhibition of AI-generated art, and it was all based on this deep dream, as it was called. But then something happened in around 2015. It was this guy, Ian Goodfellow, who was a PhD student in Canada at the time. Geoffrey Hinton was also in Canada. So Canada has actually been the center of deep learning. And he was in a pub one night and was discussing how a new way of thinking and with his friends, and then went back and wrote it up afterwards. And now we have what's called generative adversarial networks, which really moved us forward tremendously. And what's happening here is there are two different neural networks playing off against each other, hence the term adversarial networks. There's one that's called a generator, which is taking random noise and producing images. Then the discriminator, the other neural network, is judging them and rejecting them if they're not good enough. So it's a bit like an art forger producing a fake Van Gogh, and then there's an art critic saying, no, that's rubbish, that's rubbish. But eventually, in fact, the generator is trained by the discriminator, and it started producing some quite good images, and that led to an enormous improvement. These are images taken, obviously, of Hollywood stars. You have to feed the system thousands upon thousands of images and train it, and it's very laborious. And you've got to have a friend who's a computer expert to go and do this. But eventually, you can do this. And of course, this was very, very significant in transforming things. So GANs, generative adversarial networks, became the next best thing. Meanwhile, in architecture, we were way behind, way behind. in 2019, I teamed up with Zaha Hadid Architects, with Refik Anadol, who's now a rock star in the world of media art, and we were sponsored by Google. This was a dream team, as far as I'm concerned, and I applied to curate. I was going to curate the British Pavilion at the Venice Biennale. In fact, Jane Burry, Mark Burry's partner, was also in the team, and John Fraser, who was also based over here. Anyway, we weren't even shortlisted. 2019, nobody was even thinking about AI. And what we were planning to do was to hallucinate buildings, to do with faces, do with the buildings. But nonetheless, Refik got on with it anyway. He got all the images he could get of Zaha buildings and trained a neural network on these things until eventually he was able to then start hallucinating images. And out of this, eventually, out of the computer, even though Zaha's no longer with us, eventually we get an image that looks vaguely like it could have been designed by Zaha. And that's that image, which then went on the front cover. So I've got the Korean version here of my book, which came out on December the 16th, 2021, during COVID. We didn't have a book launch. And it was out of date within a few months. Anyway, it wasn't the first book on AI and architecture. It was the first book in English. My doctoral candidate, Wan Yu He, wrote one in Chinese before that, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Then after that, we went from style GANs, which produced that image, to cycle GANs, and this is the work of Kurt Pimmelblau. There's a guy called Daniel Bolojan, who was a real genius, studied with Zaha and Gavanta, and then worked for Kurt Pimmelblau, and he produced this. And this is basically a form of extrapolation. When you use style GANs, you've got a finite set, and you can only ever average or get a blend of what you've got there. I mean, it'll be different, but only different within a certain range. But if you use cycle GANs, you can pair this off. I think this is Kurt Pimmelblau buildings paired off against geographical formations, and you can therefore extrapolate, and you can breed them, effectively. You could breed Zaha against orchids or something, and that really opened things up, and this was the next best thing. In fact, and it wasn't too bad. It's kind of glitchy and things, but it was hard work, and you needed someone like Daniel Bolojan there to do that, and the resolution wasn't great, but that was the best we had, and we put that on the AD that we produced. It came out, I think it was the fourth or fifth book on AI and architecture, which also was out of date even more quickly after about a month or so, because something else happened, and this was what we call diffusion models. And these are now what we use, right? They're text-to-image things. They're so much easier because they're pre-trained neural networks trained on a vast corpus of text, and they're using kind of connections with images via captions and so on. And these work in a very, very different way. They work through a diffusion. There's a diffusion process. I won't go into it, but it basically uses Gaussian noise to disrupt an image, and then in repairing itself, it comes up with a different image. But it's so much quicker, and the resolution's better, and something else has happened now. Now, what's interesting about this, and don't anyone tells you that AI copies, it doesn't copy. It basically extrapolates things. It looks out for certain features and things, but it doesn't copy. It searches and synthesizes. In this particular case, the prompt was an astronaut on a horse. There's probably never been an astronaut on a horse, or certainly not a photograph of one. And what it's able to do is to synthesize what that would be and produce an image based on that. And this was the new thing that happened, I guess, around April of 2022, exactly the same time the AD came out. And we were in a different world entirely. And I was talking about these things at the AA, saying, when is the architecture profession going to wake up to these things? And there was a voice in the audience who said, this has already happened, it's already happened. It was Patrick Schumacher, and at Zaha's office they've been collaborating with Refik, and this was the result of using DALI, which wasn't available to the general public until later, but because Refik was well known, he was one of the people given a license to use it, and suddenly we were in this much better world of diffusion models. Mid-Journey's now become, I think, much more popular, but you can see much better resolution, almost a sense of three-dimensionality about it. Anyway, and of course that's not really what it's going to be about in terms of architecture. It's going to be about the software being developed right now. we don't really know what's going on because they're keeping very quiet about it because it's all under non-disclosure agreements. They're not going to tell people what's going on. I happen to know because one of the leaders in the field is one of my doctoral candidates, both in FIU and also in Tongji in China. But these companies, SpaceMaker was I included them in my book and compared them to XCool. I didn't think they were as good as XCool, but anyway, they were bought up by Autodesk, and what you're getting is basically packages now. I don't think Autodesk is so strong. I think these guys are the ones who are really going to be changing things. This is the work of Wan Yu He. I'll talk about her soon. The very early hallucination of images. This building does not exist. Those images I showed you, the people, there is a site you can go to called This Person Does Not Exist. And every time you refresh your browser, you'll get a completely new image of someone who doesn't exist. There's also a site, This Cat Does Not Exist, if you want to finding out about cats. Anyway, this was the thing that started moving things. And now they've actually got this thing called LookX, which is XCool back to front. I should say that Wan Yu used to work for Rem Koolhaas, and the company XCool means ex-Koolhaas, also means super cool. But then OMA, AMO flipped round, so they introduced LookX, which is the first ever large language model that's been trained on architectural images with architectural terminology, because that's quite important. Because the trouble about Midjourney and DALL-E is they're not trained on architectural images. And certain words like specification, they won't recognize it, whereas this is. And this is kind of interesting. This is Tim Fu took a piece of screwed up paper and then put it through LookX, and it's reading a Gehry design and a Zaha design out of these things. And so I think this is kind of significant. Anyway, 10 predictions. We'll get serious for the architects here, the professionals, okay? 10 predictions about the future of architecture. AI will become an indispensable assistant. Elon Musk had already commented, basically, we've all become cyborgs. We have got this machine extension of ourselves and our phone, and so on and so on. We are already superhuman. That's absolutely the case. We are all cyborgs these days. But the question is kind of to what extent. This is, interestingly, Mustafa Suleyman, who's recently been appointed the head of AI at Microsoft, was in charge of Inflection, and they're developing a personal AI for you to use, which I'm sure is the way forward. It'll be there as your personal assistant. We'll have that with us the whole time. But this graph, this is probably the most important thing I'm going to show you today. This graph here. It's a research that was done by sociologists at MIT and Harvard, and it's not a very good graph, actually. It's a very confused graph. We need a proper graphic designer to go and to look at this. But basically what it's saying is those who use AI, this is in terms of quality, are not, or those who are using AI are significantly better than those who are not using AI in terms of quality. They also looked at speed and quantity, and basically you cannot compete unless you're using AI. That's the message in this diagram. There'll be other diagrams. This was based on ChatGPT. They actually were using it for a kind of creative project. They were asked to develop a shoe and to market it and so on, to design and market it. So they did have some creative content, but we need some more precise research. But the writing's on the wall. This is basically the way it's going. We just simply cannot afford not to use it. Design and construction will be driven by data. Just to go back to Wan Yu, she was working for OMA. She went to Berlage in the Netherlands, and she worked for REM in Rotterdam for a while, and then moved to Hong Kong. Those of you who know Hong Kong will know that Lang Kwai Fong is the nightclub district. They were working there to all hours of the night. Everyone was having fun downstairs, and they were just like, why are we working so hard? And Wan Yu said, I am not going to do this anymore. I'm going to sort this out, because there was so much wastage going on. And she's moved into a kind of a way of thinking which is based on data rather than sketches that you just kind of throw out and whatever. This is Wan Yu, amazing woman. She's very, very powerful, and I think XCool are going to going to do to Autodesk what SpaceX did to NASA. I think they're going to show them up. Anyway, and they also it's going from data to fabrication, and they're building up. They're using the logic of kind of Lego brick, as it were. It'll all be based on prefabricated intelligent units that won't be like Lego blocks. They'll be super smart Lego blocks, and you'll be able to track the whole thing from the whole way through to fabrication itself. And I won't go into that too much detail today, but that's the idea, that it's going to be all data is going to be behind everything that we do. When I was walking here today, I noticed there was one of those America's Cup yachts on display, and I was at a conference in Kitzbühel in Austria where, strangely, designers of super yachts were up a mountain talking about designing super yachts. And what I discovered actually is that the guys who are working on these super yachts, they use a lot of AI, right? And there's one particular guy who's then moved to set up a company, BAR Technologies, in the UK, and they're trying to use that technology towards environmental concerns. So they have these wind wings that help reduce carbon emissions by 20%, and it's all based on AI. What's interesting about the way they operate is that when they're designing a hull of these ships, they don't sketch anything. They don't sketch. Sketching's out. It's all based on data. It's all generated through data. That's, it seems to me, is the way we're probably going to be going, for better or for worse. AI will overhaul the design process. I think, we're going to get these platforms where everything is going to be integrated the whole way along, and it'll keep check of cost. It'll make sure that you're conforming to environmental standards and everything else. That's certainly the way that XCool are working, and I think that's also the way that Autodesk are working. And of course, automation will be fundamental to the way that we're operating. One thing I would say, though, is and this is kind of irrelevant in some senses because we're not using GANs anymore, but I think the way we're operating already with Midjourney, those of you who've used it, it's shifted. What we're doing is okay. So I think that human beings are very good discriminators. We can sniff a cocktail, sip a cocktail, sniff a perfume, and immediately, within a fraction of a second, we can tell whether we like it or not. I don't think we're quite as good at creativity as we think we are, And what's happening is Midjourney is kind of throwing out these options. What about this? What about this? What about this? We hadn't thought of them, right? So it's really supplementing us where we're weaker. And I think, in general, that's what's happening. So the shift is going towards being the curator. We're selecting. You create a search space, you generate these options, and then we select things. It's a shift. Are we designing anymore? We're generating. Are they designs or are they outcomes? I think there's a general shift we can see already. I think that's going to be more extreme as these things begin to kick in. Buildings will become intelligent. They're using what's called digital twin. Now, digital twin is a bit confusing because it's been used in so many different ways, but the way I like to use it is where you're using AI to actually control the performance of either a machine or a car or a building. And this building here doesn't look very futuristic, right? This is Ali Malkawi's environmental center at Harvard. And there's a digital twin inside it, and it's controlling everything. That's going to be the future, in controlling environmental control systems. And the same thing happens at a larger scale in terms of cities. What is the city of the future going to look like? Is it going to be something like this, out of something like the Jetsons, science fiction, futuristic? Or is it going to be something like this? This is LA today. Pretty much the same as the city of today. A few new buildings, but essentially with all the existing buildings retrofitted, like Ali's building, with new technologies, and all the infrastructure, the roads and things, all the traffic controlled by AI, and also the cars themselves being self-driving. That's my vision of the future. I don't think it's going to be about sexy forms at all. And in 2009, when John was with me at the USC, I published this book, Digital Cities, AD, and it was full of architects kind of giving their vision of what the future of the city would be like. And this is Patrick Schumacher telling us it's all going to be parametric. In fact, that's the first time he ever wrote an article about parametricism was on this particular thing. This was the vision of the city. And all the other architects did exactly the same thing. But the best article, I think, was one by Ben Bratton called iPhone City. And he basically said, the iPhone has changed our understanding and the way we navigate a city more than any architect has. And he's absolutely right, I think, certainly in LA. And the future then for him is about information, not about form. It's not going to be about sexy form, it's going to be about information and informational processes. And this is why I disagree with people like Mario Carpo, who kind of go on about what's going to be the new form of the big data of AI. It's not going to be about form at all. Now, think about Uber. Does an Uber car look any different to an ordinary car? No, because it is an ordinary car. It's the way that it processes information that is so different. And that, I think, is the future of our cities. It's all going to be about informational processes, brain cities, as I call them. And this, in fact, is in China, where City Brain, which is a company that's been set up to use AI to monitor traffic. I don't know if they claim that they have a huge impact, and certainly they're very successful. Cities, they say, are learning to think. Well, maybe. Clients will expect their architects to use AI. There are two sides to this. The first side is what I wrote in my first book, where SpaceMaker, Harvard Auckland noticed that developers really want architects to use SpaceMaker. That technology is something they want. It is a requirement from their clients. They want to use it because they want to get a return on their investment. They want to make, humans make mistakes. AI doesn't make so many mistakes, and eventually will make fewer mistakes. It's a kind of protection in some ways. Now, fine, but there's something else that's crept in, and that is basically that clients are saying, okay, using AI, right? It's easier, right? I don't pay you so much. Well, I'll talk about that more later. They've already begun to rustle that one. Economics will be the main driver of change. This is a comment that's made by the Suskins, Daniel and Richard Susskind, The Future of the Professions, where they basically say the professions are going to die out, but I won't go into that now. But they said the main driver is going to be cost. Absolutely going to be cost itself, and I think that's the case. The risk is this. The risk is this. If you've got a company, I've got some friends in LA who run a company, 5 of them, and they're competing with all the big boys because they're using AI and they can do all this stuff. And eventually, when push comes to shove, it just could be that they could say, we could do it for cheaper than you. And there's a risk there because there's a slippery slope. We've already seen this in China. They've dropped fees from, let's say, 5% down to 1 or 2% in some buildings. The danger of that is that nobody wants to do architecture in China. Nobody's studying architecture because it's no longer well paid, and the cultural capital of architecture is going down. There's nothing to protect that. Now, if that happens also in the West, we could be in danger. Because basically there's a lump sum of money coming into the profession. It's a percentage of the cost of the building. There'll be no more buildings. Therefore, if you drop from 5% to 2%, you're down to 40% of the income coming into the profession. Now, it's not to say it's the same for everyone. For the architects, it's a different question, because I always think Zaha's like a Prada bag, right? In a sense, when you buy a Prada bag, you don't do it to save money. You do it to say that you don't care about money. Look at me, conspicuous consumption. I can afford a Prada bag, and I think the architects are going to be all right. But this is the key question. I've got a doctoral candidate working on this issue right now. For architects, we've got to establish what is our value. How do we persuade the client to pay us the same amount? And how do we justify that? And that is the key question. Maybe we can talk about it later, but I think that's, to my mind, the important thing to protect ourselves from just to give an example, maybe, of these kind of questions. I don't think it's so straightforward. At Cambridge, I was a student at Cambridge, and they used to have these big competitions and invite architects in and get some fairly famous names to go and. I remember Foster did the law faculty and so on, and Sterling did the history faculty. And then one year, I think chemistry professor decided to go straight to design build and did the building for 40% of the price. Now, the problem is actually that, okay, it was cheaper. But then they discovered, in fact, if they said, we've got a building by Norman Foster or James Sterling or whatever else, you could actually go to the alumni and say, okay, sponsor this, and they're more willing to go and to pay towards that than they would towards a design build thing. So it's a complicated question, but I think value is the important issue to be considered. The architecture profession will be disrupted. This is the problem, right? We all thought that it would be robots that would be changing things. So the blue-collar workers will be kicked out first. That's what we thought. And this is a Tesla factory where in a very controlled environment, the robots are working. But in an uncontrolled environment, it's not so easy. A robot has got the dexterity of a like six-month-old kid. If I were to put a bunch of Lego bricks on the floor here and ask a robotic arm to pick them up, it would struggle. It would struggle. And robots are expensive and so on and so on. Robots have not been advancing as quickly as we had thought. Meanwhile, AI has been racing ahead. We hadn't predicted this, but it's learning to code, right? So all the computer scientists are getting terrified. It's doing all these things. So it's not the blue-collar workers, it's the white-collar workers who are at risk. In fact, what they're doing now in Amazon factories, they've got these robots that bring these stacks, and the human beings stack the things in the stacks. I mean, that's what we do. That's what we're reduced to. And of course, they know about this in LA. We had this, the Writers Guild on strike, and also the actors on strike. I think that's been superseded by something else. I'll talk about Sora in a second, but at least they realized that. Likewise, this is actually around the corner from me. I live in Venice Beach, and this is the Gehry building, the ridiculous one with the binoculars, right? And which is now Google headquarters. And there was a protest going on there about self-driving taxis. They're very upset. I predict they're going to be burning down some Google buildings soon. Meanwhile, in architecture, what a bunch of ostriches with their heads in the sand, honestly. I mean, I'm the only one who's worried about this, okay? It seems to me. I met someone else. But most people say, oh, no, don't worry. AI won't replace human beings, but human beings with AI will replace those without AI. That's the theory, okay? So, but I mean, I could strangle people because, I mean, it's not so straightforward. It's not a one-to-one relationship. We've already established that this happens, basically, that you can do more with AI. One person can do with more with AI than another person. In other words, you're not going to need so many more people. Now, I don't know what the figure is, and it's based on the precise tasks. If we follow this prediction model, this is what we get. But four humans with AI will replace 5 humans without AI. Now, I've also heard one person using AI can achieve as much as 5 persons with AI. I don't know what the figure is, but it's not for one, so we need to get used to that. We need to get ready for that. And will we need the RIBA anymore? I mean, they're not going to protect us, right? They're going to do nothing to protect us from anything. And my suspicion is this. Once you're using software to go and do your drawings, and it's actually making sure that you conform to all the regulations, you haven't got to go along with your bow tie, with your drawings rolled up and submit them for planning permission. I mean, it'll already be judged by AI itself, and I'm not so sure this will exist in a few years' time, but maybe I'm a skeptic. I don't know. I'm giving a talk at the end of this tour. It's going to be for the Worshipful Chamber of Chartered Architects in London. I don't know what that is, but I shan't talk about this for them, actually. AI will generate optimized design. Well, that's already happening, right? I mean, this is actually, Theodoros Galados is now based in Melbourne, but he's part of a group where they produce infrared and other software. These are kind of surrogate models they're using to look at the performance of wind comfort and things and so on. So for environmental concerns, they're developing these things. They're not so sophisticated yet, and this is one of the few based on deep learning. But still, this is, I think, in some senses, the future. We're also seeing Mike Shee in RMIT has developed a software program called Amoeba, and it's one of many now, which is looking at topological optimization for structures. We're going to get optimization kind of creep in everywhere eventually, and it's going to be, AI is going to be used for all of this. Each time I give a lecture, I end up updating something, and this week I found out about this. This is a competition that Wanyu did against 200 other architects, and it's for a cultural museum in China. And what they did was use a kind of version, a bit like the infrared thing, to, I mean, look at this image here. This rectilinear block has gradually been broken down through this kind of optimization process until you get these kind of Gehry-like images, forms that eventually come out of the process. Anyway, they won this competition, and just in the last few days, they've they've actually completed the construction of it. This is the first ever AI-generated design that actually be constructed. They looked at the paneling system, and you can't, so this is the image that came out this week, and you can't see the tiling patterns on there, but they start off with 1,000 different sizes of patterns. They went to someone who worked for Gary Technologies who managed to reduce it down to 120, and then they used AI and got down to 12. And optimization is going to be everywhere very soon, and this is hugely significant. This is the first ever generative AI building to be constructed. Finally, AI will be able to design a building completely autonomously. Fantastic, amazing, wonderful. No, it'll know what taste we are because it already knows what we know, what news we like. It feeds us the news we like. It feeds us the music on Spotify. It feeds us the books on Amazon. It already knows already what we like, right? So it'll give us a building completely. But there's a problem with that, because once you've got self-driving car, you no longer need a driver, and once you've got AI, you can operate autonomously, whatever. There's actually a theory, just to really scare you. This is a guy by Toby Walsh, who thinks that we'll be banned from driving. And his theory is this, is that self-driving cars are not very good right now, but they're going to get better. But humans are always going to make mistakes. And in fact, there's a famous case of a human who crashes into a Google car. I don't know what that person was doing, checking their phone or something or whatever, to being distracted. We will always be distracted, but cars are going to get better. So the theory goes that as they develop, we'll eventually use self-driving cars more. We'll go out for a drink and whatever, and eventually we'll get less good at driving. And I've forgotten how to drive a manual car, so I can tell you it does happen, right? And eventually insurance premiums will go up because we'll be more prone to have accidents. And eventually we'll think, what the hell, and give up completely. And as Toby Walsh said, we won't even notice or care. I don't know. Okay, this is the bit where I really probably, this is the final conclusion. Well, not the final conclusion, the final section. What we need to design right now is not another building, but the very future of our profession. That's probably the most important thing to say today. Why we should not underestimate AI. So, this is not what people talk about in terms of architecture. Everyone thinks that AI is Midjourney or DALL-E or whatever it is. It's not. It's these things. It's the large language models. It doesn't sound sexy. These are not large. They're absolutely gigantic. They are gigantic. They're trained on trillions of bits of information and billions of parameters. They are huge, absolutely enormous. And every year they go up tenfold. They're getting bigger. So every 2 years, 100-fold. And what's strange about these things is that they're not computationally very advanced. There's only about 200 lines of code, but the more the data, the weird thing is they're developing these things called emergent capabilities. They're learning how to write, to translate. Nobody trained ChatGPT how to translate Latin or Spanish and English or whatever. They've learned They've learned how to write code. They've learned these things without being trained at all. And this is causing a bit of panic. Whatever, you've seen all this. There was a letter. They wanted to basically stop the production of this until they'd worked out what was going on. In fact, they refer explicitly in this letter to these emergent capabilities. What chance of that? It's a bit like asking the leaders in the Olympic marathon to slow down. Of course they're not going to slow down. As Geoffrey Hinton said, well, you've got Google and Microsoft competing. No one's going to slow down. So that didn't happen. But Geoffrey Hinton quit Google rather, to express his concerns because there was something that was kind of a bit out of control. Yuval Harari has this comment that AI has hacked the operating system of human civilization because it's learned how to write. And once you can write, you have amazing power because you can persuade people to do things. I would of architects is learned how to design. Now, I don't know if you've used Midjourney or not, but this is actually an old version, 5.2 or 3, into this thing, and they would define the kind of the quality, the resolution, the rendering, the lighting conditions, and so on. But the only word describing architecture in here is ultra contemporary minimalist house. That's it. That's it. I said in the Austrian Alps. I didn't describe the mountains in the background, the boulder in the foreground, the grass. Didn't just even define what the materials of the building are. It was done by Midjourney, all on its own. Or this one, I just said stainless steel kitchen. I didn't talk about the bush outside or the painting on the back wall or the lights or the coffee maker or the taps. It did it all. Or this, it's learned how to understand tectonic behavior and materials and so on and put them together in a certain way. Or this. This would take, an architect about 3 days to do. It does it in 3 seconds. It's rendering. It just completely, it's learnt how to do these things. So I think that it's learnt how to design. But it gets worse, right? This is Sora. I mean, Sora has not been released yet. Sora is the next generation. It's based on a large language model, but it's not based on tokens and words. I won't go into it now, but they use tokens for words. This is based on patches for videos. It basically uses the same principle, huge amounts of data. And there have already been some text-to-video generators, but they've been nothing like this at all. This is a complete game changer. And the kind of quality of the resolution, and they can keep it going. Look at the quality, unbelievable. And for about 60 seconds, they can maintain this, and it's soon to be actually being released, but this is something that is truly astonishing. And it's also guilty, shall we say, of what we consider emergent capabilities. So there's a thing called occlusion. Now, occlusion is basically when something disappears from vision and comes back into vision. So here, for example, all of a sudden there's a building or something, and we lose sight, and then it comes back. That is something it's not been trained on, something very, very sophisticated. It's also able to, well, how can I put it now? It's not as though it's operating in 3D quite yet, but there's a sense in which it's got an incredible understanding, shall we say, of 3D. This, whatever it is, when it changes its head, watch this. That is terrifying. That is amazing. That is absolutely astonishing. And I think this is the key step is when we go from 2D to 3D. And then, if you think the architects are safe, well, this is a text to video of an interior of a house, which is pretty astonishing. But maybe they're cherry picking. Maybe it's rubbish. But I mean, I kind of think I'm ready to be completely terrified when it is released. So that's about to come out, and also GPT-5 is about to come out. And all we know is Sam Altman has been interviewed by Lex Friedman, says, be prepared. There's going to be something astonishing that's come out this year, and I don't know what it's going to be. But so let's go to Geoffrey Hinton. Now, I think this guy is so interesting. He's interesting because, up until now, we've had figures who've been talking, like Ray Kurzweil, who talk very loosely about human intelligence and AI in a very loose way. Geoffrey Hinton's interesting because he's a neuroscientist, and he breaks it down into cognitive abilities. So there's knowledge, there's understanding, there's thinking, and there's consciousness, and so much else. So, but anyway, let's hear what he has to say. And this is the haka bit of today's lecture. It's the terrifying part.
It made me realize that these digital intelligences have something we don't have that makes them much better. When one of them knows something, it can tell all the others. That's what we don't have with people. So imagine you had 10,000 people, and imagine if when one person learned something, everybody knew it. You could learn a lot more stuff, right? And that's why things like ChatGPT knows like 10,000 times as much as any one person. It's because when you train it, there's lots of different copies looking at different bits of the data and learning stuff, and they can all combine what they learn instantly with a bandwidth of like trillions of bits.
So can they think?
Yes. So imagine the following scenario. I'm talking to chatbot, and we talk for a bit, and the answers it's given me seem a bit strange to me, and I suddenly realize that it thinks I'm a teenage girl. And I say, what demographic do you think I am? And it says it thinks I'm a teenage girl. So the question is, when I said I suddenly realized it thinks I'm a teenage girl, was that a metaphorical use of the word think, or is that just the same way as we use think? And I strongly believe that use of the word think, when I said it thinks I'm a teenage girl, was exactly the same way of using think as we do with people.
And so that was enough to make you say, what, this has accelerated beyond my comfort level?
I suddenly realized maybe they already are better, and making them more like real neural nets isn't the point. They're already better than us. They're a better way of doing learning. And if we make them bigger, they'll get much smarter than us. They already know more than any one person.
I understand that things could go awry, but I still think that people hear the notion of danger and they dismiss it as hyperbole.
I thought it was hyperbole for a long time because I thought these things were a long way off. I thought there will eventually be danger, but I thought focusing on it now is unnecessary because it'll be 30 to 50 years before these things get more intelligent than us. But this combination of realizing that they might have a much better way of learning than we have, because they can share knowledge instantly, and seeing things like ChatGPT or Palm at Google that can explain why a joke is funny, made me realize these things are already pretty intelligent, and if they've got a better form of intelligence than ours, then it gets to be much more urgent.
So just to clarify, I think the model we've been using in the past about, we realize there's been exponential growth. We've been basing it on Moore's law. Gordon Moore was an industrialist who, back in the 60s, noticed the number of transistors on a circuit board would double every 2 years and the price would come down by half. So you had basically, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, you had 1, 2, 4, 8. Well, that's not really the model we're talking about now. That's about a market model. What we're talking about here is something a bit like, with COVID, there's this thing called the R number, R ratio, where if it was less than 1, it was dying out, more than 1, it was going up. Well, imagine if that were 1,000. That's what we're talking about here, 1,000. You can spread to 1,000. The way in which this is operating and spreading knowledge is really quite astonishing. And certainly as far as that's concerned, if ChatGPT knows 10,000 more than any of us, that is one thing. But then there's a question of understanding. Now, he first actually came across this when he asked Palm, which is the Google version of ChatGPT, to explain a joke. And it can explain a joke, therefore he thought, well, if it can explain a joke, it must understand the joke. And in fact, if you use Palm or ChatGPT, it's not just predicting text, or it is, in fact, in some ways, but it's actually understanding the context. So it has some level of understanding. And he's not the only one to think that as well. Blazer Gueriakos is also, he even thinks we would reach artificial general intelligence. That's a different question. But anyway, and what he's saying basically is that AI has got a form of intelligence that is not the same as human intelligence. It's absolutely not the same as a human intelligence. It is a mechanical intelligence, but is way superior. I think that's the important point. What I would say, though, is any of these terms, I would put it in inverted commas. When it says think, put it in inverted commas, intelligence, inverted commas, learning, knowledge, all these terms, they're different to human terms. This is Yuval Harari, just to clarify even more.
This is the end of human history, the end of human-dominated history. History will continue with somebody else in control. In 5 years, there'll be a technology that can make decisions independently and that can create new ideas independently. Maybe they'll be nice. Maybe they'll solve cancer and climate change, but we are not sure. I'm tending to think of it more in terms of really an alien invasion, an alien fleet of spaceships coming from planet Zircon or whatever, with highly intelligent beings. This is what we are facing, except that the aliens are not coming in spaceships from planet Zircon, they are coming from the laboratory. If the humans are divided among themselves and are in an arms race, then it becomes almost impossible to contain this alien intelligence.
I don't think you read my book, but I'm glad he uses that term in alien intelligence. I find it quite useful. I gave a lecture in Warsaw recently, and Nicholas Copernicus comes from Poland, and he, of course, was famous for the notion of the Copernican revolution, understanding that the universe doesn't revolve around the Earth, but the Earth revolves around the sun. I think we've also got to go through the second Copernican revolution and realize that we are not the center of intelligent life entities in the universe. There's something out there that is far smarter than us. And our problem has been to look down at AI and say, oh, it's not conscious, it's not sentient, it's not as good as us. What would AI think of us if it could think, right? You're probably incredibly slow and stupid, right? So I think once we recognize that, when we were in a better situation. But let me finish off another British voice. I was criticized back in Menkes for playing too many British voices, but this is Arthur C. Clarke, who said this in 1964. This is truly astonishing, because it's though he's talking about 2024. Arthur C. Clarke.
However, the most intelligent inhabitants of that future world won't be men or monkeys. They'll be machines, the remote descendants of today's computers. Now, the present-day electronic brains are complete morons, but this will not be true in another generation. They will start to think, and eventually they will completely outthink their makers. Is this depressing? I don't see why it should be. We superseded the Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal men, and we presume we're an improvement. I think we should regard it as a privilege to be stepping stones to higher things. I suspect that organic or biological evolution has about come to its end, and we are now at the beginning of inorganic or mechanical evolution, which will be thousands of times swifter.
The message is don't panic. And I believe this, right? One thing we've got to take into account is we as human beings are incredibly adaptive creatures. Neuroscientists say because we've got a plastic brain. We adapt to everything and we get used to it and don't worry about it, right? I mean, if 50 years ago someone had come up to you and said, if you're around 50 years ago, that is, and said, in 50 years' time, most marriages will end in divorce. You would think, oh my God, end of the universe, my God, the world's falling apart. Well, that is the case, I think, anyway, now. You know, and the world hasn't fallen apart. We got used to it. I think we're going to get used to a different future where there'll be not so much work. Hopefully the funding will, the wealth will be shared around. Be different. We won't necessarily be working 6 days a week, 7 days a week as an architect, maybe 3 days or 4 days. But we'll get used to it. We'll forget about the old days, just as we forgot about the days of fax machines and the days before we had cell phones and so on. So I want to finish my very final slide in another very British way. Keep calm and carry on. Okay.
Thank you so much, Neil, for such a rich and engaging presentation. I'm sure we've got many questions in the audience. If you could put your hand up and we'll walk around with a mic. Probably.
Well, no, I think they're recording it, so you have to. You use the microphone.
It's for the live stream.
Cool. I have a question of 2 parts. So to start off with, when was the last time that you touched a pencil?
I touched a pen yesterday. I had to fill in a form too.
A pen.
No, I used to. I can't even read my writing. I used to win the prize at calligraphy, and I can't. But yeah, okay, go.
All right, no, that's okay. Thank you. And so, what do you think is the value of a hand sketch or a physical model as computable data in the future?
Is that connected to the first one?
Completely irrelevant.
You know, I went to university in Cambridge. We had a professor there who said you couldn't use a computer. And the smart students used a computer, then they would go to trace overlay, and they would fuzzy hand drawing to fool their professor. The bad students just did a hand drawing. They were unemployable. They could not get jobs. It's the way things are going. I started off when I was writing, I used to use a pen, a beautiful pen, nice writing, whatever. And then you transition, you start thinking through the computer. So it's a question of what you use these devices as tools to think through. And I don't think there's a difference between a pencil and a computer in the end. They're both tools. They're just one's more sophisticated. And frankly, it's actually much better. This sounds a bit weird to you, but I started off as a translator of Alberti, from Latin into English, right? And this is back in 1988 it came out, right? And I was working in the computer science department at Cambridge, surrounded by these geeks. We called them anoraks. They were incredibly smart, but had no social skills. I thought they were great. And I'd spoken to Joseph Rickfeld, who was my supervisor, and he gave me a book, write it in that style. Actually, I didn't write in that style, but what I discovered is by using the computer, there was a process, and I could edit things and change things. And before that, you would type it out, you'd Tipex it out, you would never do it more than twice. That was it, it's too expensive. But you revise it, revise it, revise it. And out of that process, something came out which was much more pithy, much more precise, much better language. And at that moment, and they were just beginning to do CAD drawings that time, I began to see this is the future, this is the way forward. So it's how you use a tool. There's nothing special about a pencil or a pen, frankly. They're just tools, prostheses. In fact, they make us cyborgs as much as a cell phone does. So I think it's a question of actually getting used to these tools and working with them, working through them, because without them, I think this is the point that Wanyu was making. You do a sketch, throw it away. Do another sketch, throw it away. But when you're working on the computer, you can at least record what you've done and adapt it and change it and edit it. So that's my view. I mean, but I used to be very good at drawing and won the drawing prize. I cannot read my own writing now, so, whatever. But I can use the computer.
Oh, thank you.
Hi there. Your book, The Anesthetics of Architecture, talks at great lengths on aesthetics and the oversaturation of the image. The concern was in that book that while architecture practice focuses more on image, it objectifies itself and removes itself from everyday living experience. So architects could be devoid of designing something they didn't have any experience of. You had a quote: "The world of the image, which is the the world of the image, which is the enemy of the imagination." How would you reconcile this 1999 thought with your 2024 thought and the emergence of AI?
It's actually very interesting. I mean, I did write another book after that called Camouflage, which was kind of trying to, because anesthetics is a polemic and it was one-sided, and I knew there was another side to the argument, but and I think it's still true. It's still true. We're still obsessed with images, and I followed that up with a book called Digital Tectonics, which was looking about how we don't think about other things like structure, or you could even think about environmental things. And of course, that I'm aware of. These are just images, particularly the Mid-Journey stuff. I think we have to be critical. That's the crucial thing. I'm now increasingly working in neuroscience rather than continental philosophy, and I think there are some interesting things that are coming up out of neuroscience that are basically giving us the same information in some senses. We see the world through a lens. That's the message that we get in anesthetics. And a rose-tinted lens. It looks beautiful, but actually what's been rinsed out of the social, political, economic, and I would argue also environmental concerns these days. But then when you start looking at neuroscience, you basically also see things through a lens. I mean, basically that's looking at how we are being trained to see the world in a certain way. If you show a kid a rainbow and ask he or she how many colors, they'll say 7. But that's not true. There are an infinite number of colors in a rainbow. And we think we've been indoctrinated in certain ways of thinking, and it's important to kind of expose that as well. So, I still think that the message there should be used today. I think criticality is an important thing, and I think the message in French post-structuralist thinking is that we should problematize things, ask questions the whole time. I mean, I don't know what the answer is about the issue of AI, but for Derrida, if you were aware of a problem, it was a different kind of problem. It wasn't a problem by which you were trapped. It was a problem with which you could deal. So I don't want to see this as a fetishization of images, although you could take it that way. I'm interested in the process. How does it do these things? And what is it doing? And what is it learning about things? But you're absolutely right. You have to keep that critical perspective on things. There's a new book just come out. I haven't read it yet, Critical Theory of AI. But I think there are a lot of different lenses you need to look at. In my Camouflage book, I try to argue, but there is an important thing about how we can empathize with things through design itself. So, but you're right. You're right to ask that question.
Thanks, Neil.
So you showed images and demonstrations of how AI is getting better at optimizing things for structure or the environment, so on and so forth. As AI gets better at optimization, and I'm imagining one day detailing and specifying things, as it also gets better at curating, because you mentioned earlier on that AI sees the way generally and it picks up on why certain things are favored instead of copying things. So as AI gets better at optimization and gets better at curating, what do you see is the role of the architect over the next several years in the near future, I'd imagine?
Well, I don't think it is good at curating. I think that's its weakness. I mean, I can generate stuff. I mean, I didn't show it today, but I could do the same prompt I use for buildings. I just change building and fashion, and I get this Zaha-looking fashion coming out, as it were. But I have no idea if it's good or not, and I have to ask my friends in fashion about that. And I think in the end, I think what we'll turn into kind of connoisseurs. We will, you cannot produce something on Midjourney unless you've got a good eye. That's something that's kind of interesting. So I think that's what we will. But the shift will be towards that. I mean, what is a theorist like me doing producing those designs? I mean, I'd given up designing to go and write books and things, and yet, people like myself or Lev Manovich are now producing stuff. It's kind of weird. But I think that's what it'll be. We will be very good curators. I think the shift will be towards a curatorship. Yeah.
So just as a follow-up on that, you know how on Midjourney, when you produce an image, you can select one of 4, for example, to make further iterations on. Would you say that you're effectively training the AI on what your method of curating is? And if you're training the AI in curation, can it get better at curating and effectively become its own curator?
I don't think you're training it. Not yet. I don't think it has a memory of that. I mean, ChatGPT has some memory, but I don't think it has any memory. But you're just simply selecting, you're breeding, like a greyhound breeder. You're saying, I think that's got an interesting feature, and let's explore that. I mean, it's kind of basic, actually. But I mean, what I would say is interesting about Midjourney, just to go back to that kind of question about, we say that it's prompt engineering, and it sounds very objective. Some of my friends in England said, do a house extension. And I started putting the word house extension in there, and I thought, oh, that's curious. I've got this gloomy weather, and I've got British architecture. Why is that? And I discovered actually the term house extension is British. I don't know if you use it in New Zealand. I think in the States they call it home improvement or something. But so what you get is kind of, and everything is contextualized. It's weird. If you put in the name of Louis Barragan, you will get not just a Louis Barragan building, you'll get Mexican sunshine, Mexican plants, and so on. And that's actually how our minds work. We also work associatively. So everything is embedded in a context, and our minds also work that way. So if we see a red hob on a cooker, we know not to touch it because we know by association it's going to be hot. So what I find interesting about this, and this is I didn't talk about today, is really how this weird world of AI can become a mirror to help us understand how our minds work. Now, the thing is, they're completely different. We don't know, and we don't know how the mind works because how the brain works. It's a black box. Nor do we know how neural networks work because they're also black boxes. But nonetheless, I think we're beginning to understand certain things about what is creativity and what is learning and things that out of using these tools. So I guess my agenda is that really trying to use these tools to think about what's going on inside our minds. I mean, already I'm blanking his name now. Stephen Wolfram has commented, well, if ChatGPT can produce seemingly convincing text, that suggests that maybe language is not as complicated as we thought it was in the first place. So there are all these kind of questions that are back of my mind, but I've gone on a tangent on your question. That's my apologies.
All right, thank you.
Hi, Neil.
Hi, David.
Had to ask a question. You sort of talk about this idea that we can kind of just get on and we'll get on and deal with it. And I'm just wondering, in the last few years, there's been a couple of big sort of moments where within the architecture urbanist kind of framework, things have kind of ground to a halt because of various factors. So the 2 examples I would give is that Jesse Chapins, I don't know whether you know him, but he came through this kind of process of new media architecture, was very much into the idea of the database documentary, for instance. Got snapped up by Google and was leading the Toronto Waterside project, which ground to a halt around the kind of, the sort of center city versus democracy. That kind of just blew out, really. The metaverse, Schumacher was 2 years ago designing for the metaverse, but that seems to be non-existent now. And I'm just wondering whether you see a similar sort of moment where the kind of the discussion and the worries and the kind of concerns about AI will kind of hit a similar sort of blockage, and then we'll just get on using it as a tool and not worry about it so much.
No, I totally agree. I think when somebody first invented the light inside a fridge, and you opened the door and the light came on, people were amazed by that. Look at that, you know. And frankly, you get used to these things; they become standard. I don't think people. I mean, what tends to happen is as soon as a technology comes along, people fetishize it. You know, you got a robotic arm. Everyone's like going to conferences. Look what I can do with my robotic arm. Well, I mean, so what? You know, what can you put that use to? I don't know if you know the work of Behnaz Farahi, but she's been appointed to the MIT Media Lab, and she's taking a critical perspective on these things. How do you use these tools to critique society? And I think that's, in some ways, the important thing about how you could use it in an important way. But we will get used to it. Actually, I think that AI is going to be kind of boring. It's going to be a little bit like spell check writ large. You know, it's probably going to be type something, it'll say, no, that's not right. You know, it's that kind of thing. So I think we'll get beyond that. And I think that the superficiality of these images and so on will soon pass, for sure. We'll get bored of it. So. But just to go back to, I think there are other issues that architecture is facing. This is just the top of things. And I think already it's a profession in crisis. There was a report that was done by the RIBA that they published and then they withdrew because they were sort of embarrassed by it. The Building Futures group that I used to belong to, and they basically pointed out that there are a number of things happening. First of all, the term architect was kind of almost redundant now. And all the ARB, RIBA and things were trying to defend the name of the architect. There was an absurd situation where they issued an edict saying that Renzo Piano could not be called an architect in the UK because he wasn't trained in the UK. And then people are saying, well, actually, we don't really want the term architect is a bit limiting because we do industrial design, we do other product design, we do interactive design. It's not so useful. So it's already in kind of crisis. And if you think about I don't know if you know about the Alberti's definition of the architect. The person in charge, that was the whole thesis behind Alberti, was that the architect was now this kind of intellectual in charge of the whole site. Well, frankly, in the UK, more than 50% of all projects are now design-build. The architect's not in charge of the site. So it's on top of lots of other things that, I don't think that if there's going to be demise of the architect, it's not just AI, it's going to be a number of other things. We've gradually been losing our authority over the years, I'd say. But correct me if I'm wrong in New Zealand. Maybe it's a better situation.
Actually, don't need a microphone.
No, but I think they need to record it. So.
Oh, okay, yeah, brilliant. Pass it across.
I could chat. Thank you for your presentation. Architects are also citizens, and so this is a question as a citizen. Once we have intelligent cities and intelligent buildings, surely they are open to being hacked maliciously by other agencies, state agencies, private individuals, or hacked by other systems which wish to advance themselves at the cost of the systems that we've put in place to run our intelligent cities or intelligent buildings. I'm worried about that. Are you?
Well, a lot of people have been concerned about this. There are many things actually to be worried about, but in terms of these things, well, let me just say that Stuart Russell, in London, I've been talking alongside Stuart Russell, and he's concerned, for example, there's a movie called Slaughterbots, where he's worried about autonomous weapons being used, and he sponsored this movie, and it's kind of terrifying. If you look it up, you'll find it online, Slaughterbots. There are many things that you should worry about. I think in terms of hacking, I don't know. We have spam already, and we have people phishing and so on, and we get used to it. And we become more discerning. I'm for sure. I think that certainly the U.S. elections are going to be completely dominated by deep fakes, no question. But I think we'll kind of become more discerning. I think. I don't know. But yeah, no. The problem is who uses it and for what. That's what I started off by saying in some senses, and I think we can be thankful that that Putin, who recognized. He made this comment years ago, whoever rules AI rules the world, I think he must have siphoned off all the money for AI research to his private villas because they didn't show in Ukraine the kind of things that you would expect, although we've seen Israel using AI recognition and so on. So anyway, but no, it's for sure we need to, the trouble is, if you can't stop Putin invading Ukraine, how are you going to stop people misusing these things? But you're right, this is a concern, but there's no real answer to that question.
Could we zoom out for a moment and sort of talk about, you mentioned, 5 people become 4 people in the profession, that coders are worried, that kind of this, the whole of society might change. Maybe the people who are in charge will share the money around, but how do you see the future of work or the future of society with this technology around?
Yeah, I mean, there's Daniel Susskind's got a book out called The Future Without Work, and several people talking about it. I mean, I don't know quite, I'm not an economist, I can't say for sure how it's going to work. The idea is that you're going to share things around, right? I'm a bit suspicious about that because Google know how to protect. They don't pay much tax at the moment, and I'm sure they've developed techniques and strategies to protect their own money. So I'm not quite sure how we're going to make it work. But for sure, in the States they're going to be in trouble because the idea of sharing anything in the States is socialism is a bad term in the States. So I'm not sure what the answer is. But I don't know. I mean. Again, it's a question of if you're aware of a problem, you need to address it. It is going to change things, and the worst thing to do is to pretend it's not going to happen, which I think most architects are doing. I mean, architects are charming. But they're absolutely useless. Let me tell you a short anecdote. I used to teach in the Bauhaus, and I'd been on a trip to Barcelona with my students, and we'd been trying out absinthe, and there was an absinthe bar in a shop in Berlin, and I went there and I said, I've just been to Barcelona, an amazing absinthe, and I was describing it, and the guy there said, oh, amazing, try some of this, and he was really enthusiastic, super nice guy, and he was pouring me out this stuff, and after about half an hour I was completely drunk, and I hadn't really bought a bottle and things, but anyway, I did buy one, and I said to him at one point, I was so drunk, I came out and said, you're charming, I love the way you love absinthe, but I've got to say you're a hopeless businessman. You're worse than architects. I mean, architects will work all night on a competition. They've got 1 in 1,000 chance of winning, and even so, if they win, they don't pay for the cost of their models. All these kind of things. Anyway, I said, you're worse than architects. And you know what he said? I am an architect, yeah. That's architects. I love architects. They're so nice, but useless.
On that note, we'll take I think we might have a moment for a few online questions. And can you explain more about what do you mean by controlling of digital twin?
Okay, well, a digital twin, I mean, one is just simply a simulation, a digital simulation. And that's the loose way in which people use it. And I've been using basically, it's using AI as a brain to control a situation, an environment. So either the heating system in a building or something, or in terms of roads, the traffic and so on. It means real-time feedback. You could do it in China, right? You probably couldn't do it elsewhere. Certainly not in what was it, in Canada. So I mean, yeah, it's about that real-time feedback. You feed it into a kind of brain, as it were, that's telling you how to optimize things.
Thank you. And what is your opinion about liability and copyright?
Oh, yeah. We had a really good session on digital futures about that. Actually, copyright, first of all, copyright. Everyone says, I'm going to sue you. It's not so straightforward for all sorts of reasons. And I won't go into them all now because it's very difficult to prove how you get anything out of anything from a technical perspective anyway. But certainly, if you wanted to sue someone for copyright, first of all, it's going to take you 3 or 4 years, certainly in the States. And secondly, you're going to need 6 figures before you even get to the stage where you could even make a case. So it's not a viable option. So copyright it's actually very interesting. I mean, what I'd say is I've written a chapter about it. I don't want to go into detail there, but it is not so straightforward. We had on Digital Future, we had 2 copyright lawyers, one from Harvard, one from MIT, and they were talking about it. And we've got to stop using these terms. I'm going to sue you for copyright without really understanding what it means. And was it liability? Was the other question?
Yeah. Copyright and liability.
Well, I mean, maybe I could take the term liability in a different sort of way. I think that in future, I'm trying to avoid the difficult part of the question. No, I think in the future, actually, we're going to have to use AI to safeguard our liability because it's going to be pointing out the mistakes we're making. And if we're not using it, it'll be like with the insurance going up for driving cars. We're going to have to use these things. So I think it's going to safeguard us rather than the opposite way around. But there's it's a longer answer to that. Yeah.
And how does the SpaceMaker software updates itself to adapt to the plan changes and tweaks to regulations of a certain city to provide design options for developers or architects, and is it in a precise manner?
You know, I'm very suspicious of SpaceMaker, partly because my student, or not, I can't call her a student, she teaches me, is her main. I think I think that Autodesk paid too much money for SpaceMaker, 240 million. And from talking to the guys at Foster and Partners, they don't even think it's AI they're using. So they're kind of suspicious, and I would tend to be no. But it is a difficult thing actually in the end. So this is the problem. I think that WANU's facing is that every country is different in terms of its regulations, and there's a lot of hard work that goes into it. Absolutely, and so for example, they've been working in China and they've been using Chinese data, and they have advantage because actually you can use Mechanical Turks much cheaper there. They tried using Japanese data and it didn't work because of different regulations. So it is very, very complicated, super complicated. And yeah, so that's a limitation.
As a follow-up to that, I'm aware that in New Zealand we've got plan changes and the RMA reforms, etc. Are you aware of if it's aware of those?
RMA? What?
Resource Management Act.
Sorry?
Resource Management Act in New Zealand.
No, I didn't know that.
All right, okay. So you haven't heard of it keeping up to date with New Zealand's regulations?
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems that, in terms of the regulations is are they aware of the technological changes? For example, I mean, just in terms of patent law, there was a case in the States where they said that some guy produced this artwork that won a prize in an art fair and using AI, whatever, and he tried to patent it. And they said, you can't patent a work that's been produced by AI. But that's kind of stupid because actually you're in charge. You're the one who's selecting these outcomes and manipulating them. So I think even that the judges are way behind. So I would assume that some of these regulations are probably a little bit dated now. I have no idea. But yeah.
Maybe we'll go to last question from the audience.
Thank you, Neil. That was really fascinating. I'm a bit confused because you started with I'm terrified and you end up with kind of a more measured message for us. And it's been suggested that architects are the best people to share data to get better outcomes. That we good architects generate a vast amount of excellent work that if shared, so this kind of responds to the copyright question, provides the perfect learning set. Do you have any views on that sort?
First of all, someone went to ChatGPT and asked them whether I was more positive or negative about AI, and it's 66% positive, it said, so I don't know what that means. But no, you're right, and my colleague Daniel Bolojan is working on precisely that issue, and he's writing on it. I don't know much. I could tell you more in about a month's time when we try and submit the manuscript for the book. But we're doing a book called The AI Design Revolution with for Routledge, and it's going to be Wan Yu He doing the software thing, myself on the kind of theory, Daniel Bolojan doing the kind of designer side of things, and Theodoros Galanos, who's in Melbourne, doing the environmental thing. So I don't know the answer, but you're right. It is a concern. I'm not quite sure whether that actually works. For the old days, everyone was sharing code like people would share cigarettes, but then they realized that people were just stealing their code, so they stopped doing that. And I'm a bit nervous about giving my prompts away, I have to say.
Architects have always had to have a good eye, right? I mean, and you endorse that. We need a good eye to judge the million options that AI might produce for us in a sketch. But I'm kind of interested in the notion of originality and how that's been debunked, I know, but it's also still a kind of, it's dear to the human heart, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, just one thing quickly, in terms of sharing information, the Digital Futures is a platform that I set up, and it's all about sharing everything, absolutely everything. Nobody gets paid anything. We all share stuff, and it's up there for free. It came out of my working in the Bauhaus. I was teaching there, and it's free in Germany. We've got all the students who got offered places at Harvard or AA. They couldn't afford to go there. And I began to realize that basically that everywhere throughout the world, the top 2% are really good. And they just can't afford to go anywhere. So we decided to have this platform where we kind of launch things where our view is that education shouldn't be a privilege of the wealthy, but a universal human right. So everything is free, free there. So so that's my bit of trying to be generous, I guess. Creativity, that term was invented in 1929. I think we need to rethink some of these terms. And I'm not going to go into it now because it's a kind of slightly controversial, I think. But basically, if AlphaGo could come up with something that looks makes human creativity seem a little bit straightforward, and I don't think AlphaGo is being creative at all. It's just been very rational. It's searching through the options. Are we just mystifying the process? Is creative? Oh, you're so creative. What do we mean by that? And Arthur C. Clarke has got a number of interesting kind of comments. First of all, he says that technology, any advanced technology seems magical, but it's not magical because magic doesn't exist. A magician doesn't perform magic. Just hides the sleight of hand when the rabbit comes out of the hat. It's not really magic. And sometimes I'm suspicious about creativity. Oh, we use the term as a blanket term. But what really is going on there? So I think this is another area, I think, where Margaret Bowden says, I think AI helps us to understand some aspects of human behavior. And that's fundamentally my interest, is trying to understand what the hell we're doing, in the mirror of AI, ultimately. That's my concern. I'm not so sure we're quite so creative at all. At all.
Thank you so much, Neil, for your presentation and for everyone's contribution with the questions. Just a note that if you would like CBD points, please fill in this form here. And for those joining online, please fill in the Google form, which is a record for NZIA's attendance list and for CBD. So everyone, another round of applause for Neil Leach. Thank you.
Just to mention briefly, the discussion about copyright and so on, all these things are on digitalfutures.international. So you go there and it'll click on and take you to a link to the YouTube channel where everything's for free there. And there was some interesting discussions about some of these things. So anyway.
Yes, and on that note, please feel free to stick around for drinks and nibbles and continue the conversation the laneway. Thank you, everyone.